You're nothing but a common thief, Maya. Mr. Sterling's voice shattered the expensive silence of the dining room. He grabbed Maya's wrist, pulling the hidden container from her apron while the wealthy patrons stared in cold judgment. He didn't just fire her, he emptied the gourmet leftovers onto her shoes, a wet thud of wasted dignity. Maya, a young black woman exhausted from 18-hour shifts, stood trembling under the fluorescent lights while her boss shamed her for stealing scraps destined for the trash. But to understand how it all came to this, we have to go back. 6 months ago, Maya began the extraction. Every night she'd smuggle high-end meals past security to Elias, an elderly white man living behind the dumpster. While her own fridge sat empty and eviction notices piled up, she fed him like a king. By the second act, the restaurant installed cameras, turning her act of mercy into a dangerous nightly heist. The neon sign of Sterling's flickered in the puddle outside. But for Maya, the world was a series of cold, calculated subtractions. To understand why Maya risked everything for a man she barely knew, you have to see the walls of her world. Her apartment was a 4-story walk up in a building that groaned with the weight of forgotten repairs. The air inside smelled of damp plaster and the citrus, scented industrial bleach that lived under her fingernails. Every morning at 4 a.m., Maya's day began not with sunlight, but with the aggressive buzz of a cracked smartphone screen. Her kitchen was a monument to scarcity. She would stand before the open refrigerator, a hum so loud it felt like a third roommate, and stare at the singular carton of eggs and a jar of generic peanut butter. She performed the poverty math in her head. If she walked 40 blocks instead of taking the bus, she could afford the good detergent for her uniform. If she skipped lunch, she could pay the minimum on the electric bill. Her life was a high wire act. On her bedside table sat a stack of envelopes, each one a different shade of urgent. The red one was the eviction notice, a jagged reminder that she was only 2 weeks away from joining Elias on the sidewalk. She would press her forehead against the cool glass of her window, watching the city wake up, feeling like a ghost already. She was 24, black, and brilliant at a mathematics she never asked to learn, the math of survival. Then there was Elias. Their connection wasn't built on grand gestures, but on the quiet dignity of shared shadows. 6 months ago, Elias was just a silhouette behind the dumpster. But as the nights bled into weeks, he became a person. Elias was white, his skin mapped with the wrinkles of 1,000 stories, and eyes that held the sharp clarity of a man who had once looked down at the world from a high altitude. "You're late, Maya," he'd say with a rasping chuckle, sitting on his throne of flattened cardboard. The kitchen must be busy tonight. He never begged. He never looked at the food with the desperation of a starving dog. He looked at it with the appreciation of a connoisseur. One Tuesday, she brought him a portion of coq au vin that a wealthy diner had barely touched. Elias took a bite, closed his eyes, and leaned his head back against the brick wall. "The burgundy is a bit young," he whispered, "but the bouquet. It reminds me of a cellar in Bordeaux I visited in '94. We were tracking a lead on a senator's lost assets." Maya would laugh, a tired but genuine sound. She thought his stories were the harmless hallucinations of a broken mind. He spoke of 3 letter agencies, of redacted flight paths, and senators who cry like babies when the heat gets turned up. She didn't believe a word of it. To her, Elias was just a grandfather without a home, a man who treated a plastic fork like silver cutlery. But their bond deepened when Elias noticed Maya wasn't eating. He'd try to split the container in half, pushing it back toward her. "You're fading, girl. I can see it in your eyes. You've got a fight in you, but a fire needs wood." "I'm fine, Elias," she'd lie, her stomach cramping in protest. "Just eat. I get plenty at the restaurant." She didn't tell him she was living on hot water and salt. She didn't tell him she was terrified. In those moments, feeding Elias wasn't charity. It was a protest. It was Maya saying to the world, "You won't let me eat, but you won't stop me from being human." However, by the middle of the second month, the protest became a heist. The restaurant's owner, Mr. Sterling, noticed the inventory didn't match the waste logs. He didn't see the food as a way to help. He saw it as a line item on a spreadsheet. Efficiency is God. He would bark during the morning meetings. Then came the cameras. The mechanical eyes, Elias called them. Maya's method, the extraction, had to evolve. The back alley door now had a motion sensor. The kitchen was under 24-hour surveillance. Maya had to become a shadow. She began to map the blind spots of the lenses. She learned that the camera over the prep station panned every 30 seconds. She had exactly 6 seconds to slide a steak into a hidden pouch in her apron while she cleaned the counter. She practiced her poker face in the cracked bathroom mirror. If she looked nervous, she was dead. She had to move with the rhythm of a machine. She double-bagged the gourmet scraps and black liners, disguising them as genuine trash. She would carry the heavy bags out, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. One night, the new floor manager, Jackson, stopped her at the exit. "Bag seems heavy tonight, Maya. What's in there?" Maya didn't blink. She looked him dead in the eye. Her voice as cold as the walk, in freezer. "Broken plates and arrogance, Jackson. You want to reach in and check." He stepped back, disgusted by the thought of touching the trash. Maya walked past him, the weight of the smuggled ribeye pulling at her shoulder. Out in the alley, the cold air hit her face, and she felt the rush of the gamble. She was a waitress by day, a thief by night, and a savior at 11 p.m. Every night, the risk grew. Every night, the cameras seemed to watch her with more hunger. But when she saw Elias waiting in the dark, his face lighting up at the side of her, the fear vanished. She knew the clock was ticking. She knew Sterling was closing in. But as she handed over the warm container, Maya felt a power that no paycheck could ever provide. She was the one who decided who lived and who died in this alley. She was the one holding the line against the darkness. The rain did not just fall that Tuesday, it assaulted the city. It was a cold, needle-sharp downpour that turned the neon lights of the district into bleeding smears of red and blue against the oil, slicked asphalt. Inside Sterling's, the atmosphere was suffocatingly warm, a sensory overload of wealth. The air was thick with the scent of shaved truffles, aged balsamic, and the heavy floral perfume of women who had never known a day of hunger. Maya moved through the dining room like a ghost in a high-end machine. Her feet ached, a dull, pulsing throb that radiated from her arches up to her hips, but her mind was performing a different kind of labor. She was calculating. She was always calculating the distance between the surplus on the plates and the deficit in the alley. In her mind, she was perfectly synchronized with the mechanical eyes. She had memorized the ballet of the security system. The camera in the northwest corner of the kitchen had a slight, almost imperceptible hitch in its rotation, a stutter of exactly 3 seconds every 2 minutes. That tiny mechanical flaw was her window. It was the crack in the fortress. But tonight, the air in the kitchen felt heavy, electric with a static she couldn't explain. Mr. Sterling wasn't in his glass, walled office upstairs overlooking the floor like a gargoyle. He was down in the trenches. He was walking the line. His hand-tailored charcoal suit, a sharp, insulting contrast to the sweat, stained white tunics of the line cooks. His eyes, a pale, predatory blue, seemed to anchor on Maya every time she pushed through the swinging doors. "Efficiency, Maya," he whispered as she balanced a tray of crystal flutes, his voice barely audible over the hiss of the grill. "Waste is the ultimate sin in this house. It's the difference between a legacy and a bankruptcy. Remember that when you clear the tables." She nodded, her heart performing a frantic, uneven drum roll against her ribs. She knew what was waiting in the dark. Elias hadn't eaten a solid meal in over 48 hours. The city's quality of life, task forces had been raiding the squats near the pier, and Elias had been flushed out like vermin, forced to hide in the damp, freezing shadows of the restaurant's loading dock. No fire, no dry blanket, just the shivering endurance of a man the world had decided to delete. The shift dragged on, A marathon of fake smiles and heavy trays. Every minute felt like an hour. At 10:45 p.m., the extraction began. Maya stood at the prep station, a silver tray of discarded shadow beyond, barely touched by a socialite who had spent her evening complaining about the lighting sitting before her. The meat was still warm, a king's ransom of protein destined for the incinerator. In one fluid, practiced motion, Maya draped a linen napkin over the tray, slid the premium beef into a heavy-duty vacuum bag hidden in the secret pouch of her apron, and replaced the tray in a dish pit stack. She felt the weight of the theft immediately. It felt like a stone. It felt like a physical manifestation of her fear. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have seen, was Mr. Sterling standing in the unlit shadows of the dry storage room. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at his smartphone, glowing with a high-definition live feed from a new pinhole thermal camera he had authorized just that morning. A camera Maya hadn't mapped. He watched the heat signature of the meat disappear into the heat signature of her body. He didn't move. He didn't shout. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and waited. He wanted the crime to leave the building. He wanted the betrayal to be absolute. Maya grabbed the heavy black trash bags, her standard tactical cover. She pushed through the heavy metal back door, and the roar of the storm swallowed the sterile hum of the kitchen. The alley was a dark canyon of weeping brick and overflowing dumpsters. The wind whipped her hair across her face as she hurried toward the rusted alcove behind the industrial generator. "Elias," she hissed, her voice trembling with a mix of adrenaline and relief. "Elias, I've got it. It's still warm. Real food, Elias. You need the strength." A shadow detached itself from the brickwork. Elias stepped into the dim light of a flickering street lamp. But the man Maya saw wasn't the dignified, eccentric critic of the previous weeks. He was a shell. His gray beard was matted with gray slush, and his eyes were wide, darting, filled with a primal terror. "Maya, you have to go," he rasped, his breath coming in ragged plumes of white. "The air, it's gone sour. The city feels like an open trap today. I can feel the teeth closing. It's just the cold, Elias. Here, take this," she insisted, reaching into her apron. Suddenly, the alley exploded into a violent artificial white. It wasn't lightning. It was the focused, blinding glare of 3 tactical flashlights cutting through the rain. "Drop the bag, Maya." Slowly, Mr. Sterling stepped into the light, flanked by Jackson and 2 private security guards. Jackson held a tablet aloft, the glowing screen displaying the crystal-clear footage of Maya's extraction. Sterling looked at the scene with a curated expression of theatrical disappointment. He looked at Maya's soaked uniform, then at the trembling old man, and finally at the bag of meat. "A thief, a liar, and a scavenger," Sterling said, his voice flat and clinical. "I gave you a life, Maya. I gave you a wage that kept you off the very sidewalk your friend here calls a home, and you repay my charity by siphoning my inventory into the gut of a ghost." Charity? Maya's voice broke, but then it hardened into something sharp. She stood her ground, the rain drenching her to the bone. "You don't know the meaning of the word. You throw away enough food in a single night to feed every hungry child in this district. You call it waste management. I call it a crime against humanity." Sterling walked forward, his polished Italian leather shoes splashing through the oily black puddles. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. He reached out and snatched a vacuum-sealed bag from Maya's cold fingers. He held it up, inspecting the marbled fat of the beef as if he were in a showroom. Then he turned his gaze to Elias. "You've been enjoying my kitchen for a while now, haven't you, old man?" Sterling asked. Elias didn't blink. He stood tall, his spine straightening in a way that seemed impossible for a man of his age and condition. He looked Sterling in the eye with a terrifyingly calm clarity. With a sudden, violent sneer, Sterling dropped the bag into the thick gray mud of the alley before Maya could react. He brought his heel down on it, twisting his foot until the plastic burst. The expensive red juices of the meat mingled with the filth and the rainwater. Now it's garbage, Sterling whispered, leaning in close to Maya's face. Now it's exactly where it and you belong. You're done. I'm not calling the police because the paperwork is a bore. But I am blacklisting you. Every restaurant from here to the coast will know your face. You won't even get a job washing dishes in a prison. Now get out before I let the dogs off the leash. Jackson shoved Maya back against the wet brick, and the men retreated into the warmth of the restaurant. The heavy steel door slammed shut with a boom that echoed like a gunshot through the alley. Maya collapsed. She sank into the mud, her hands hovering over the ruined meat. She felt the cold seep into her marrow, her life, her math, her survival. It had all collapsed into this single, muddy moment. She looked up at Elias, expecting to see a broken man. But Elias was different. The tremors in his hands had stopped. He pulled a small, waterproof notebook from a hidden pocket in his tattered coat, a notebook that looked far too professional for a homeless man. He began to write with a focused intensity. "Maya," he said. His voice wasn't a rasp anymore. It was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of a man who had once commanded rooms. "I told you I used to track the money that doesn't want to be found. I told you I knew why the powerful hide in the dark. You thought it was a fairy tale." "Elias, what are you talking about? We have to leave. The police will be here for the sweep in minutes." "Let them come," Elias said, snapping the notebook shut. He reached into a hidden seam in his sleeve and pulled out a small laminated card. It had no name, only a gold-plated chip and a series of 16 embossed digits. He pressed it into Maya's muddy palm. "Sterling thinks he just fired a waitress. He's a small man with a small mind. He doesn't realize he just broke the only seal that was keeping me from detonating his world. He took your dignity, Maya. That was the one line he couldn't cross." "Elias, I don't understand. Who are you?" "I'm the man who knows where the bodies are buried, and Sterling just gave me the shovel," he said, stepping back into the shadows. "Go to the Central Library, Terminal 7. Use the code on the back of that card. You'll see the redacted flight paths. You'll see exactly who owns Sterling's soul. It's not just a restaurant, Maya. It's a clearinghouse for blood money. And now, you're the only one with the key." A flash of lightning illuminated the alley. In that split second, Maya saw Elias standing like a soldier, a ghost of the man he used to be. When the thunder rolled and the light faded, the alcove was empty. Elias had vanished into the ring. Maya stood up, her body shaking from the cold, but her heart was a furnace. She looked at the card in her hand. The math of survival had changed. She wasn't fighting for a meal anymore. She was fighting for the truth. As she walked out of the alley, leaving the ruined meat behind, she realized Elias hadn't been the one in danger. Sterling was, and she was the one who was going to deliver the message. The Central Library stood as a neoclassical fortress of knowledge, its massive granite pillars looming over the rain-drenched sidewalk like indifferent gods. Maya entered the lobby, her breath hitching in the sudden silence. The air here was different, dry, smelling of old paper, ozone, and the quiet desperation of people seeking answers. She was a splinter in this polished world. Her uniform was soaked, her shoes left muddy tracks on the marble floor, and her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline of the alley. She didn't care about the stares from the late-night students or the security guard's suspicious gaze. She only cared about the card in her pocket. Terminal 7 was tucked away in a corner of the basement, a dimly lit rows of outdated monitors and humming towers. Maya sat down, the plastic chair cold against her wet legs. She pulled the card out. In the harsh, flickering light of the computer screen, the gold chip seemed to pulse. Following Elias's instructions, she bypassed the standard login and found a command line interface that looked like a relic from a forgotten era. She entered the 16 digits. The screen flickered black. Then a cascade of green text began to scroll at a dizzying speed. Access granted, Level 9 clearance detected. Project Silent Gavel, Archive 1994 to 2024. Maya's eyes widened. This wasn't just a restaurant's accounting software. As she began to navigate the directories, she realized she was looking at a digital graveyard of secrets. There were thousands of files marked redacted. She searched for Sterling's, but the results didn't point to a simple business ledger. Instead, the restaurant appeared as a neutral point, a physical location used for the handoff of what the system called unaccounted assets. She clicked on a folder labeled Sterling, Arthur Logistics. The first document was a flight manifest, small private planes arriving at a regional airstrip at 3 a.m., 3 times a week. The cargo was always listed as high-end perishables, but the weight never matched the inventory Maya saw in the kitchen. She compared the dates. Every time a shipment arrived, a massive wire transfer was made from an offshore shell company in the Cayman Islands to an account that funded Sterling's expansion into the city. "He's not a chef," Maya whispered, her voice lost in the hum of the server fans. "He's a ghost shipper." But the deeper she went, the more the math of survival turned into the math of malice. She found a subdirectory titled E. Vance Monitoring. Her heart stopped. She opened the file. There, in high-resolution surveillance photos, was Elias. But he wasn't the man in the alley. In these photos, he wore sharp suits and walked through the halls of the Department of Justice. The file described him as Elias Vance, lead forensic accountant, International Crimes Division status, disavowed/presumed deceased. Elias hadn't been a critic or a crazy man. He had been the man who almost caught them. The files detailed a systematic campaign to destroy him. They didn't kill him. They erased him. They liquidated his assets, fabricated a mental breakdown, and stripped him of his identity until he was forced onto the very streets he was trying to protect. Sterling wasn't just a bully. He was the jailer. He had kept Sterling's in that specific location because it was Elias's old neighborhood. It was a psychological torture, forcing a man who once tracked billions to beg for scraps outside the monument of his enemy's success. Maya felt a wave of nausea. The injustice wasn't accidental. It was a curated masterpiece of cruelty. She scrolled down to the most recent entries. Under the current month's log, she found a series of encrypted memos between Sterling and a contact listed only as the architect. Vance is getting close again. He's talking to the staff, a girl named Maya. She's observant. Recommendation: terminal termination of both variables during the municipal sweep on Tuesday night. Maya's blood turned to ice. Terminal termination. They weren't just going to clear the alley. They were going to make sure Elias and Maya never spoke again. She looked at the clock on the wall. 11:45 p.m. The sweep was scheduled for midnight. "Elias!" she gasped, standing up so fast the chair clattered to the floor. She didn't have much time. She began a massive data dump, slaving the terminal to a cloud drive she had created on the fly. The progress bar crawled. 40%. 55%. She knew that the moment the architect saw a Level 9 login from a public library, they would be coming for her. She stared at the screen, her mind racing through the logistics. If Sterling was a laundry machine, then the restaurant wasn't just a business. It was evidence. Every meal, every bottle of wine, every waste management report was a layer of camouflage for the movement of blood money, and Elias had given her the key to the vault. 85%. 92%. Suddenly, the screen turned bright red. Security breach. Location tracked. System lockdown initiated. Maya grabbed the card, shoved it into her pocket, and bolted toward the stairs. She didn't wait for the elevator. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her lungs burning, the wet cold of the night waiting for her outside. As she burst through the library's revolving doors, she saw a black SUV with tinted windows idling at the curb. The doors opened. 2 men in tactical gear stepped out. They didn't look like police. They looked like the private security from Sterling's. Maya didn't think. She turned and ran toward the labyrinth of the subway station, disappearing into the crowd of late-night commuters. She was a ghost again, but this time the ghost had a weapon. She surfaced 3 blocks from Sterling's. The rain had turned into a mist, thick and suffocating. The street was lined with city garbage trucks and police cruisers with their lights off. The sweep was starting. The cleaning of the alley was beginning. She reached the entrance to the alley, but it was blocked by yellow tape. A bulldozer hummed at the far end, its metal bucket scraping against the asphalt like the teeth of a giant. "Elias!" she screamed, ducking under the tape. "Hey! You can't be here!" a voice shouted behind her, but she was already in the shadows. She ran toward the alcove. The generator was dead, its hum silenced. The cardboard throne was gone. The ruined meat was scattered and trampled into the gray slush. "Elias, answer me." She saw a figure near the industrial dumpster. It was Sterling. He was standing there, his suit protected by a long black trench coat, watching as the workers tossed Elias's meager belongings into the back of a compactor. He looked at Maya, his expression one of mild amusement. "You're a persistent little thing, aren't you?" Sterling said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "I told you what would happen if you returned. You've gone from a thief to a trespasser, and trespassing on a night like this, it's very dangerous." "Where is he?" Maya demanded, her hand tightening around the card in her pocket. "What did you do with Elias Vance?" Sterling's eyes narrowed at the mention of the name. For a second, the mask of the sophisticated restaurateur slipped, revealing the hollow, jagged man beneath. "Elias is where he belongs," Sterling said, stepping closer. "He's a footnote, a glitch in the system that has finally been corrected. You, on the other hand, are a loose thread. And I hate loose threads, Maya. They ruin the fit of the suit." He signaled to the shadows behind her. Maya felt a heavy hand on her shoulder. It was Jackson. He looked at her with a grimace of pity, but he didn't let go. "Check her pockets," Sterling commanded. Maya struggled, but Jackson was too strong. He pulled the card from her pocket and handed it to Sterling. Sterling held the card up, a cold smile playing on his lips. The chip. Elias was always so fond of his physical backups. He never understood that in the new world, data doesn't matter if there's no one left to read it. He dropped the card onto the wet ground and crushed it with the heel of his boot, just as he had done with the meat. "There," Sterling whispered. "The last piece of Elias Vance. Now, Jackson, take her to the—" A sudden, deafening sound cut him off. It wasn't thunder, it was the sound of 1,000 cell phones in the alley and in the restaurant next door, all chiming at once. Sterling frowned, reaching for his own phone. Maya looked at the screen of a nearby worker's phone. It wasn't a text message, it was a broadcast. A video was playing. The thermal footage of Maya in the kitchen, overlaid with the flight manifests, the wire transfers, and the voice recordings Elias had hidden in the card's secondary partition. Elias hadn't just given her a key, he had given her a detonator. The system lockdown Maya had triggered at the library hadn't been a failure. It had been the final step of a pre-programmed burn protocol Elias had spent 30 years building. The architect wasn't just a contact. It was the name of the virus. Sterling's face went pale, then a ghostly, sickly white. On his phone, he watched his bank accounts drain to zero in real time. He watched the redacted flight paths scroll across the screen, followed by his own home address and the GPS coordinates of his offshore vaults. Inside the restaurant, the diners were standing up, their faces illuminated by the blue light of their phones, reading the truth about the man they had been celebrating. The math of survival had finally reached its final equation. "What did you do?" Sterling hissed, his voice trembling. "What did you do?" Maya looked him in the eye, the rain washing the mud from her face. "I didn't do anything, Mr. Sterling. I just cleared the table, like you told me to." Suddenly, the alley was flooded with real police lights, not the city sweepers, but federal units. In the chaos, Maya looked back at the shadows behind the generator. For a split second, she saw a man standing in the mist. He wasn't wearing a suit, and he didn't look like a ghost. He looked like a victor. He gave her a small, solemn nod, then turned and walked into the darkness of the city, disappearing into the one place they could never find him, the truth. Maya stood alone in the rain as the sirens closed in. She was unemployed, she was broke, she was exhausted. But as she watched them lead a handcuffed Sterling through the mud of his own alley, she realized that Elias was right. The air had changed. The birds were going to sing in the morning. The roar of the sirens eventually faded into a rhythmic, pulsing blue hum that painted the wet bricks of the alley. Arthur Sterling didn't fight when the federal agents pressed his face against the cold metal of a command vehicle. He didn't scream. He simply looked hollow, his eyes fixed on the muddy puddle where his legacy had just been liquidated by a line of code. Jackson was gone too, led away in plastic zip ties, his face a mask of silent regret. The restaurant, the Fortress of Wealth, was now a crime scene, its golden lights flickering out as the power was cut for the forensic sweep. Maya stood on the corner of the block, a silver thermal blanket draped over her soaked uniform. A female agent had given it to her, but Maya barely felt the crinkle of the foil or the warmth it was supposed to provide. She watched the technicians carry out crates of high-end perishables that would never reach their destination. She watched the digital evidence teams haul out the server towers from Sterling's office. The math of survival was finally over. The variables had been balanced, the surplus had been exposed, and the deficit was finally being paid. As the first hint of gray light began to bleed into the eastern sky, Maya walked away from the lights. She didn't go to her apartment. She walked toward the pier, toward the old neighborhood Elias had called his own. The city felt different. The air was no longer thick with the suffocating scent of Sterling's truffles and balsamic. It smelled of salt, wet stone, and the sharp, clean ozone that follows a great cleansing storm. She reached the park overlooking the water. The benches were empty, the grass silver with dew. On the very last bench, the one closest to the edge of the pier, sat a small wooden birdhouse that hadn't been there the day before. It was crudely made, painted a defiant, bright yellow. Maya sat down on the bench. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small handwritten envelope. It had been tucked into the folds of her thermal blanket by someone she hadn't seen. Inside was a single key to a small storage locker in the North District, and a note written in the precise, authoritative hand of a man who tracked billions. Maya, the math is finished. You were the only variable I couldn't account for, the human one. Sterling thought the world was a machine, but you reminded me it's a garden. You gave a ghost his name back. Now give yourself a future. The locker contains this surplus they tried to hide from the world. It's not blood money. It's the recovery fund for the erased. Use it. Clear the tables. Feed the birds. Maya looked up as the sun finally broke over the horizon, turning the gray river into a sheet of hammered gold. From the rafters of the old pier, a single sparrow began to sing. Then another, and another. A chorus of small, persistent voices rose above the hum of the waking city. She wasn't a ghost in a machine anymore. She was a witness. Maya stood up, leaving the silver blanket on the bench like a shed skin. She walked toward the city, her steps light, her head held high. Behind her, the birds continued to sing, their song of victory march for the people who refused to be deleted. The Tuesday assault was over. Wednesday had arrived. Maya's math finally added up to something more than survival. It added up to justice. But in the shadows of our own cities, there are thousands of Elias Van Cess waiting for a single moment of recognition. What small act of kindness will you choose today? Someone near you is waiting to be seen. Let us know in the comments how you'll help clear the table for someone else. If this journey moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to The Vault. Your engagement is the fuel that helps us uncover the stories the world tries to redact. At Soul Vault Stories, we don't just tell tales. We unlock the truths buried beneath the surface. We don't water down the pain, because we know that the most powerful light only shines after the deepest dark. If today's story spoke to your soul, subscribe and join our community. Be the voice that refuses to be silenced. We'll see you in the next Vault.